With the fire already lit for the execution, the widow's firm voice cut through the air, bringing the truth no one wanted to hear. What seemed like a sentence turned into liberation and changed two destinies forever. Subscribe to the channel and follow how this turnaround happened. The screams echoed through the village even before dawn. In the flower house where families from the riverside community of Aguas Claras gathered every morning, despair had a name and face. "My son won't stop vomiting! Help, people!" Donna Zepha's voice crossed the yard as she carried little Tio in. Her arms, the 6-year-old boy with yellowish skin and sunken eyes. It was the third consecutive day that children were falling ill in the village. First it was Seu Domingos's daughter, then Justino's twins, now Zepha's son. What began as whispers among the washerwomen at the river transformed into certainty when the doctor from the neighboring town, who came only once a month, confirmed contaminated water. Mothers despaired, fathers demanded explanations. The central well of the community, which had served everyone for decades since the Pedras River began showing signs of pollution, was now under suspicion. It was then that Seu Tarcisio, the store, owner and informal spokesperson for the community, let slip what many were already thinking in silence. It all started after that Indian began coming around here more often. The silence that followed was like embers preceding high flames. No, one needed to say the name everyone knew. Gerasi, a solitary Krenak who lived between two worlds. He didn't live in the village that was a few leagues away, nor did he belong to the village. He built his hut at the river bend, collected herbs, fished, sold basketry and medicinal roots at the fair. He spoke little, observed much. He maintained a respectful distance but was never truly accepted. He messes with those strange herbs. I've seen him poking around near the well. The voice of Donna Nosa, the prayer healer who had lost space and prestige since some people began seeking Gerasi for health problems, fueled suspicions. "Sorcerer," someone whispered. "Dark healer," added another. In less than an hour, fear turned to anger, and anger transformed into movement. A dozen men, led by Seu Gercino, headed toward Gerasi's hut. The village of Aguas Claras was located in the interior of Minas Gerais, where time passed slowly and news was rare. When it arrived, it came in the form of threats. First the dam built upstream by the mining company, then the decrease in fish, now sick children. For a community accustomed to seeking visible culprits for invisible problems, Gerasi was the perfect target. The group found the indigenous man crouched by the stream that fed his small garden. He didn't even have time to stand up. "Child murderer!" The first push came from Tarcisio. Gerasi staggered, tried to speak, but a punch from Gercino silenced him. He was dragged by his long black hair, while his dried herbs and baskets were trampled. His resistance didn't last long against so many. Closed fists. In the central square they tied his hands to the trunk of the large gamalera tree, which had once been a symbol of celebration, and would now serve as a stage for injustice. The mayor was in the capital. The sheriff only came when called. The law there was made by Seu Altino, justice of the peace for 30 years, a man of few words and many sentences. "Have you brought the accused?" he asked from the window of his house, which overlooked the square. He didn't even come down to see the bloodied man. Well, poisoning, death of children. What does the community decide? A collective condemnation disguised as a popular consultation. The crowd was already shouting when Donna Nosa stepped forward. In the old laws, those who poison water pay with fire. The suggestion lit up eyes. Boys were sent to fetch dry wood. A stake was planted a few meters from the trunk where Gerasi remained silent, his gaze fixed on the horizon as if he were no longer there. The sun reached the middle of the sky when a voice cut through the murmur of the square. "Stop this madness! This man had nothing to do with it!" Everyone turned. It was Conceição, the pharmacist's widow, who lived in the exposed brick house at the edge of the village. She carried dusty books and a lantern even during the day, said the gossips. She talked to herself among strange plants she cultivated in her backyard. Conceição had arrived in Aguas Claras 20 years earlier, when her husband, Artur, decided to open the first and only pharmacy in the place. When he died 5 years ago, many expected her to return to the big city. But she stayed. She continued preparing medicines, attending emergencies, guiding childbirths. She was respected out of necessity, not out of affection. By what right do you condemn a man without proof, without trial? This isn't justice, it's barbarism. She advanced through the center of the square, carrying a bucket that everyone recognized. It was from the central well. I can prove it wasn't him. So Altino, uncomfortable with the interruption of his informal verdict, descended the 3 steps of the veranda. Conceição, you have no authority here. Go back to your house and your books. I have the authority of knowledge, Altino. And you know that. That's why you called me when your granddaughter had a fever last month, wasn't it? The comment provoked murmurs. The justice of the peace swallowed hard. What do you mean? That I know what's making our children sick. And it's not witchcraft, it's not a curse, it's this. Conceição raised the bucket. The water, apparently clean, had a slight yellowish tone when seen against the light. This water is contaminated with mining waste. The well was dug too close to the old riverbed, and heavy metals from the Minério do Brasil dam are infiltrating the water table. Too many technical words for ears unaccustomed to science. Seu Tarcísio was the first to question. How can you be sure of this? You're not a doctor. I'm not, but my husband taught me how to analyze compounds. I have a small laboratory at home. I boiled, filtered, tested. Arsenic and other heavy metals are present at dangerous levels. This is chemistry, not magic. The crowd hesitated. Science was foreign territory, but poison had a very concrete meaning. And why would the Indian be near the well then? Someone shouted. Probably doing what I also did, testing the water. He knows nature better than any of us. He must have noticed the problem earlier. Jurasi, still tied up, finally spoke. His voice was low but clear. I saw the dead fish first. Then the water changed smell, I tried to warn. The silence that followed was heavier than the previous accusations. Shame was beginning to infiltrate where before there had been only certainty. So Altino, a practical man above all, saw the opportunity to end the spectacle before it turned against him. Release the man. Let's investigate this mining company. Story. Jurasi was untied without apologies, without reparation, just released. Limping, with his face still bleeding, he moved away in silence. Conceição followed him with her eyes as the crowd dispersed. She knew that the truth was not enough to heal wounds as old as those that separated worlds, but it was a start. The next morning, she found a small package of leaves on her doorstep. Inside, fresh roots of a plant she recognized. It was used to purify water. She looked toward the forest but saw no one. The message, however, was as clear as the water that would one day flow clean again in that land. 3 days later, the situation worsened. 5 more children were hospitalized in the neighboring town. The mayor of Águas Claras, pressured by the seriousness of the case, called an emergency meeting in the parish hall. Conceição arrived early, carrying a folder with notes and samples. She observed when Jurasi entered through the back, almost invisible to most but not to her. The bruise on his face was still visible, a reminder of the recent injustice. The meeting began tense. On one side, residents worried about their children. On the other, 2 representatives from Minério do Brasil, the company that managed the dam upstream. The man in a suit and tie, identified as Dr. Paulo Mendonça, Director of Community Relations, spoke with the confidence of someone who has the power of money. Minério do Brasil follows all safety protocols. Our analyses show that there is no contamination coming from our facilities. Mayor Ademar, more concerned with his re-election than with the truth, nodded in agreement. That's when Conceição asked to speak. Excuse me, but I have evidence that contradicts this statement. She stood up, unrolled a handmade map of the region. I analyzed water samples from 6 different points. The concentration of heavy metals increases exactly in the direction of the dam, following the underground path of the old riverbed. The mining company representative smiled condescendingly. Do you have a certified laboratory? Are you an environmental engineer, chemist, geologist? I am a pharmacist by training and practice, and I know how to recognize a contamination pattern. A pharmacist? The man laughed, looking at the other executives. I think we need slightly more relevant credentials to make such serious accusations against a company that generates jobs and development for the region. That's when a deep voice sounded from the back of the hall. She is right. Gerasi stood up. The silence that followed had the weight of collective guilt. My people have lived on this land for hundreds of years. We know the river as we know. Our own skin. It is sick, poisoned. The fish are dying, the plants on the bank are drying up, the dam bleeds poison that you cannot see, but the earth feels. The mining representative exchanged glances with the mayor. With all due respect to indigenous traditions, we need scientific evidence, not mysticism. Mayor Adamar tried to regain control of the meeting. We'll form a commission to assess the situation. Meanwhile, the city hall will distribute mineral water to families. And who will pay for the treatment of hospitalized children? Shouted Donna Zephyr, whose son was still in the hospital. The city hall is doing its best, the mayor began. The best is not enough, interrupted Conceição. We need an independent, immediate analysis and the suspension of the mining company's activities until it is proven that there are no risks. This is absurd. The company representative became exalted. Do you have any idea of the damage this would cause? Of the jobs that would be lost? At that moment, Father Joaquim, who until then had only observed, spoke up. What is priceless is the lives of these children. If the company is so sure of its innocence, why does it fear an independent investigation? The meeting ended without concrete resolution, only with vague promises. As people left, Conceição noticed Gerasi standing in the shade of a mango tree. She approached him. Thank you for supporting me in there. He nodded briefly. You spoke the truth. The river is dying. Do you know any path to the dam? I need to collect more samples, but the area is restricted. Gerasi studied her for a few moments. I know many paths that white men don't see. I can show you tomorrow. They arranged to meet at first light, at the border between the village and the forest. Conceição arrived before dawn, surprised to see that Gerasi was already waiting for her, silent as a shadow. Without many words, he guided her through almost invisible trails climbing the slope that led to the dam area. After 2 hours of walking, they stopped at an elevated plateau. Below them, the immense artificial lake of mining tailings shone with an unnatural orange tone under the sun. There, Gerasi pointed to a crack in the side of the structure. The earth is drinking the poison and taking it to the underground river. Conceição took small flasks from her backpack and collected samples from different points. She observed how Gerasi moved with precision in that territory, how he knew each plant, each stone. How did you learn so much about medicinal herbs? She asked as they rested in the shade of a jatoba tree. My grandfather was a Apache. He taught me to listen to plants, to understand their voices. He hesitated, then continued. And you? Why? Did you stay in the village after your husband died? I heard you weren't from here. Conceição smiled, surprised by the direct question. I came from Belo Horizonte. I met Artur at the pharmacy college. He dreamed of returning to his homeland, opening a pharmacy where there was no assistance. When he died, I thought about leaving, but I realized there was still work to be done. Work. People who needed help. Knowledge that couldn't be wasted. This land is not mine by birth, but it became mine by choice. The silence that followed wasn't uncomfortable. It was a mutual recognition of similar purposes. On the way back, they found a clearing where medicinal plants grew in abundance. Gerasi showed each one, explaining their uses, while Conceição noted everything in her already worn notebook. They compared knowledge, his traditional, passed down through generations, hers technical, learned in books and laboratories. They realized they spoke different languages about the same world. When they returned to the village late in the afternoon, Conceição invited him for coffee. Hesitant at first, Gerasi accepted. It was the first time he entered a village house. As a guest, not as an intruder or accused, he observed with curiosity the stacked books, the jars with dried herbs, the small improvised laboratory. It looks like a page's house, he commented. Conceição laughed. Maybe that's what I am. Apache of another kind. In the following weeks, a pattern was established. Jurasi brought plants from the forest that Conceição had never seen. She showed books and techniques he didn't know. They began developing a natural filter using charcoal, sand, and certain roots that Jurasi knew, capable of absorbing heavy metals. They installed the first prototypes in houses with small children. The results were promising. No new cases of intoxication. Some people in the village began to look differently at that unlikely partnership. Others, however, viewed it with suspicion. Dona Neusa, the prayer healer, spread word that Conceição had made a pact with obscure forces. Seu Altino, the justice of the peace, warned that approaches with Indians only bring problems. The tension increased when one of the mining representatives visited Conceição, offering money for her to revise her conclusions about the contamination. When she refused, the veiled threats began. First, windows broken during the night. Then, plants from her garden uprooted. The pharmacy she had inherited from her husband suffered an arson attempt, contained in time by neighbors. One night, while Conceição was organizing her notes on the contamination, she heard urgent knocks on the door. It was Mayara, Jurasi's granddaughter, a girl of only 12, breathless and frightened. Grandpa sent a warning, armed men in the village. They say they'll expel everyone. They talk about a new dam. Conceição didn't waste time. She put her most important documents in a bag and followed the girl. It took almost 2 hours through dark trails until they reached the Krenak village. The scene was one of apprehension. Families gathered around the central fire, elders discussing, in low voices. Jurasi came to meet her. They have a document. They say it's legal, that we have 3 days to leave. What document? Expropriation order. For expansion of the mining area. Conceição felt her blood boil. This is illegal. This is demarcated indigenous land. For them, paper is worth more than people. Chief Ubiratan, a man of advanced age and evident dignity, approached. The white woman who defends the truth. Jurasi told us what you did. Conceição lowered her eyes, respectful. I only did what was right. Come in. We need your wisdom now. In the center of the village, by the light of the fire, Conceição examined the documents brought by the mining company. She recognized falsifications, legal manipulations, forged signatures. This has no legal value. It's a fraud, but we need to act quickly before they use force. During the night, they elaborated a plan. Conceição would use her contacts in the capital to denounce the situation. Jurasi and other young people from the village would record videos of the dam conditions and the contamination. The chief would call other villages for a great resistance meeting. We have 3 days, Jurasi reminded, 3 days to save our lands and our waters. When the sun rose, Conceição realized she had spent the entire night in the village. It was the first time she felt so connected to a purpose greater than herself. She looked at Jurasi, who was observing the horizon. At that moment, something silent and deep consolidated between them. It needed no name, no explanation. It was like the roots that intertwine beneath the earth, invisible but unshakable. The news of the expropriation spread faster than flood. Water. The next morning, when Conceição and Jurasi returned to the village to seek support, they found the climate divided. In the flower house, center of informal meetings, 2 factions were forming. On one side, families of children affected by contamination, like Dona Zefa and Seu Domingos. On the other, workers from the mining company led by Ademar, the mayor, who proclaimed the benefits of expansion. More jobs, progress for our region, he said, while distributing colorful pamphlets with promises of a prosperous future. Conceição, asked to speak. Progress at what cost? The health of our children, the water we drink, the land that feeds us. The mayor adjusted his collar, visibly uncomfortable. Conceição, always dramatic. The company has guaranteed that the new technology is safe. Besides, it's already decided. The Indians will be relocated to a better area. Better for whom? Jurassi's voice sounded firm, surprising those who knew him only by his silence. That land is sacred to my people. The bones of our ancestors are there. The spirits of the waters live in that river. Muffled laughter came from some corners. The mayor took advantage. See? That's what we're talking about. Mysticism versus development. We have to choose whether we want to stay in the past or walk into the future. Conceição felt indignation burning inside, but kept her voice calm. It's not a question of choosing between tradition and progress. It's about justice, about truth. She opened her folder and spread photographs on the central table. These are images of the crack in the current dam, and these, she placed beside them the results of water analyses, are the contamination levels found in the village, well and in the river, 5 times above what is legally permitted. A murmur ran through the hall. Is this true, Conceição? Asked Maria do Carmo, the teacher of the village's only school. Every number here can be verified by any independent laboratory. I'm not asking you to believe me. I'm asking you to demand a serious investigation before it's too late. So, Januario, a retired fisherman, stood up with difficulty. I believe her. I've been fishing in this river since I was a boy. I've never seen so much death. Dead fish, disappeared crabs. The river is dying, and we along with it. The meeting ended without consensus, but a small victory was achieved. A group of residents agreed to sign a petition demanding independent environmental studies before any new work. As people dispersed, Conceição was approached by Father Joaquim. You're messing with powerful people, my child. Be careful. What do you suggest, Father? That I remain silent in the face of injustice? No, I suggest that you be smart. The mining company has money and politicians in its pocket. You need strong allies. Like who? Like the press. I have a journalist nephew in Belo Horizonte. He works for a respected newspaper. I can put you in contact. As they talked, Juraci approached with a young man from the village. This is Raoni, my nephew. He studied law in the capital. He returned to defend our land. The young man in his early 20s extended his hand. My uncle told me about you, about what you're doing for our community. It's not just for your community, it's for all of us. Conceição hesitated, then continued. Do you know the legend that gave our village its name? Aguas Claras. Father Joaquim nodded. In the old days, the river was so crystalline that it reflected the sky like a mirror. They say Indians and colonizers drank from the same water in peace. Before the fences, before the divisions completed. Juraci. Exactly. This land and this water have always been one, and now we need to unite again to save them. The strategy was drawn right there, in the church sacristy. Raoni would use his legal knowledge to contest the expropriation order. Father Joaquim would contact his journalist nephew. Juraci would mobilize other indigenous villages in the region. Conceição would organize the scientific evidence and testimonies from affected families. A race against time began. There were only 2 days left until the deadline given to the village. Journalist Carlos Eduardo arrived the next day, accompanied by a photographer. Conceição took him to meet the families with sick children, then to see the crack in the dam. Juraci showed ancestral cemeteries that would be flooded with the expansion. The young reporter recorded everything, visibly impressed with the seriousness of the situation. This is much bigger than I imagined. We're talking about environmental crime, threat to public health, violation of indigenous rights. And now, do you understand why the local media never reported anything? Asked Conceição. Minério do Brasil is the largest advertiser in the region's newspapers and radios. As the report took shape, Conceição and Juraci became increasingly close. One afternoon, while collecting plant samples at the river's edge for analysis, he asked something he had been keeping inside. Why are you risking so much for us? It's not your fight. Conceição stopped writing in her notebook and looked directly at Juraci. When my husband died, I thought I had lost my purpose. He was the one who dreamed of making a difference in this place. I just followed him. She took a handful of moist earth and let it run through her fingers. But then I realized that the land doesn't care who defends it. The water doesn't distinguish who drinks it. We are all part of the same cycle. Jurasi came closer, lightly, touching her face. My people have a word for people like you. Iande, it means one of us, not by blood but by spirit. In that moment, under the light filtered by the leaves of the riparian forest, something flowered between them that no laboratory could analyze, no word could completely define. A connection as natural as that which unites the root to the earth, the river to the sea. On the morning of the third day, the report was published. Environmental Crime and Threat to Indigenous Lands, the Truth About Minério do Brasil. It occupied the entire front page of the state newspaper and was already reverberating on social media. Conceição's phone wouldn't stop ringing. Journalists from all over the country wanted interviews. Environmental NGOs offered support. In the middle of the afternoon, an unexpected delegation arrived at the village, representatives from the Federal Public Ministry and FUNAI. The pressure of public opinion had been strong enough to provoke a quick action. A judicial injunction immediately suspended any attempt to expropriate indigenous lands. The mining company would be investigated for environmental damages. But the victory was still far from complete. That same night, while the village celebrated with a large bonfire and traditional dances, a black car stopped in front of Conceição's house. Two men in suits entered without knocking. "Ma'am, you're causing many problems for important people," said the taller one, throwing an envelope on the table. "But everything has a price." Inside the envelope, a check with a value that Conceição had never seen in her life. It's compensation for possible misunderstandings. In exchange, you sign a retraction, admit that you exaggerated the data, that you acted emotionally. And the sick children, the contaminated river, the indigenous land. The company will create a fund for health treatment. As for the lands, that's the government's problem. Conceição took the check, observed it for a moment, then tore it into small pieces. "Tell your bosses that some things are priceless." The man smiled humorlessly. "You didn't understand. We're not asking." At that moment, the door opened. Jurasi entered, followed by Raoni and 5 more men from the village. "I think it's time for you to leave," said Jurasi, with a tranquility that made his words even more threatening. The 2 men retreated, realizing they were outnumbered. "This isn't over," warned the shorter one before leaving. "This is just beginning," replied Conceição. The next day brought a great assembly in the central square. The community of Águas Claras, representatives of the Krenak villages, journalists, authorities, all gathered to discuss the future of the region. For the first time, indigenous people had a voice in an official forum of the village. Chief Ubirata spoke with the wisdom of his 90 years. "For centuries we have lived separated by fear and greed. Now, the danger that threatens us all reminds us that we are children of the same land, that we drink from the same water." Raoni presented historical documents proving that the area intended by the mining company included ancestral cemeteries and sacred sites, protected by law. Conceição presented her scientific discoveries about contamination. Father Joaquim spoke about the importance of dialogue between cultures and the protection of the common home, citing the papal encyclical on ecology. In the middle of the meeting, news arrived that would change everything. The president of Minério do Brasil had been removed from office after the repercussions of the scandal. The company's administrative council announced the suspension of the expansion project and promised immediate measures to contain the leak in the existing dam, a significant victory, but one that did not erase the damage already caused. That's when Jurasi stood up and proposed something unprecedented. "Our village has ancestral knowledge of how to recover contaminated waters, plants that purify, natural filtration techniques. We offer this knowledge to the village of Águas Claras. In return, we ask for respect for our territory and participation in decisions that affect our river." Sualtino, the justice of the peace, initially resistant to any alliance with the indigenous people, was the first to speak. "I remember when I was a boy and swam in this river. The water was so clear that you could see the stones at the bottom. I want my grandchildren to know that same water. I accept the proposal." One by one, the community leaders agreed. A unique pact was born there, traditional indigenous knowledge combined with modern science to recover what was almost lost. Concession. And Jurasi exchanged glances. In their hands was the seed of a new form of coexistence, and in the look they exchanged, the certainty that this was not just the end of a conflict, but the beginning of something much deeper. That night, as they walked by the contaminated river they had promised to restore together, Jurasi took Concession's, and my people have a legend about a river and a mountain that fell in love. Impossible, everyone said. One flowing, always changing, the other solid, immovable. How could they meet? And what happened? She asked, feeling the warmth of that hand, rough from work and wisdom. The mountain sent its best stones for the river to polish with care. The river brought stories from the world, so the mountain would never feel alone, different, but connected forever. Concession smiled in the twilight. You know what Arthur told me before he died? That I would find my true path here. I thought he was delirious with fever. And was he? No. She squeezed his hand harder. He was seeing beyond the horizon. Above them, the crescent moon illuminated the murky waters. One day, with work and unity, they would be clear again, and they would be there to see this rebirth. The months that followed brought changes that no one in Aguas Claras could have predicted. The river recovery project, initially received with skepticism by many in the village, gained strength as the first results began to appear. The natural filtration system developed by Concession and Jurasi, combining scientific knowledge and Krenak ancestral wisdom, was installed at strategic points along the watercourse. Barriers of special plants, capable of absorbing heavy metals, formed green belts on the banks. Work parties brought together indigenous people and village residents every weekend, planting, building, regenerating. Children were the first to notice the difference. Aunt Concession, look, shouted little Tiao, pointing excitedly at the water. A little fish. Indeed, small Lambari fish were beginning to return to stretches of the river where months before only toxic mud flowed. The news of environmental recovery crossed the borders of the region. Researchers from universities came to see the project. A team of documentary filmmakers spent 2 weeks recording the joint work between the village and the indigenous community. Concession was invited to present the results at an international conference on recovery of degraded areas. I can't go, she told Jurasi as they checked the filter plants. The work here is still at the beginning. You should go, he replied, serious as always. The world needs to know what we did together. We did together, exactly. That's why you're coming with me. It was the first time Jurasi smiled openly. An Indian and a widow speaking to scientists, a traditional guardian of the land and her community researcher, showing that the answers sometimes are where no one thinks to look. While the river showed signs of rebirth, the relationship between Concession and Jurasi flourished like the plants they cultivated together. It wasn't a conventional romance. It was more like two distinct trees that over time intertwine their branches and roots so deeply that they become inseparable. The community observed with curiosity that unlikely approach. Some turned up their noses, especially the older and more traditionalist ones. Others saw there a symbol of the new Aguas Claras that was being born, a place where different worlds could coexist and strengthen each other. The trip to the international conference was a watershed. They presented the project together, each in their own way, she with graphics and scientific data, he with stories and knowledge transmitted through generations. The combination made a profound impression. An international environmental protection foundation offered funding to expand the work. Universities proposed research partnerships. When they returned, they found the village in full preparation for the traditional São João festival. But for the first time in local history, the celebration would include rituals from the Krenak culture. In the churchyard, Father Joachim announced the novelty. This year our party will have 2 moments. First, the São João bonfire, as we have done for generations. Then, we will all be invited to participate in a Krenak ceremony of thanksgiving to the waters at the river's edge. The announcement generated buzz. Sewaltino, once so resistant, was now one of the main enthusiasts of cultural integration. I'm already too old to change my way of thinking, but not to recognize when I was wrong. The party took place on a full moon night. Bonfires illuminated the central square, where couples danced quadrille to the sound of accordions and triangles. The aroma of corn, pamonha, and mulled wine filled the air. When the Catholic celebration came to an end, around midnight, a group of young Krenak arrived with drums. Jurasi, dressed with headdresses and traditional body paintings, invited everyone. "Come see how my people thank the river for life." Many hesitated, but curiosity overcame fear. A procession of lanterns followed to the riverbank, where a large mandala of flowers, seeds, and crystals had been prepared. Chief Ubiratan explained, "Each symbol, each gesture." Children from the village and the indigenous community mingled, fascinated by the stories. At the most solemn moment of the ceremony, Jurasi called Conceição to the center of the circle. "This woman represents the bridge between our worlds. Through her heart, the waters flow clean again. Through her courage, our lands remain ours." He gave her a necklace of red seeds. "This is the necklace of the water guardians. My grandfather wore it. Now it's yours." Conceição, moved, bowed her head to receive the gift. When she rose, she saw something that left her speechless. Dozens of small lights floating in the river. "Aquatic fireflies," explained Jurasi. "They only appear in very clean waters. They've returned." A murmur of admiration ran through the crowd. The symbol was too clear to be ignored. The river was being reborn. With the visibility achieved by the project, it didn't take long for the experience of Aguas Claras to inspire other communities. Representatives from neighboring villages, also affected by mining, came to learn the environmental recovery techniques. Young indigenous people from different ethnicities spent seasons in the Krenak village to learn about the work. The village school incorporated classes on traditional knowledge and environmental education into the curriculum, taught by Krenak elders. Mayor Ademar, sensing the new direction of the winds, became an enthusiastic defender of what he called our green revolution. Few remembered his initial support for the mining company. Politics is the art of navigating the tide, and the tide had definitely changed. With the success of the project, a new challenge arose. Conceição's small pharmacy, inherited from her husband, transformed into an improvised research center. Lines formed daily, people seeking guidance, researchers wanting to learn the techniques, journalists after interviews. "We need a larger space," she told Jurasi one morning, exhausted after attending to dozens of people, "and more people working with us." The solution came from an unexpected source. Minério do Brasil, now under new direction and pressured to clean up its image, proposed financing the construction of a center for environmental recovery and traditional knowledge. It would be built on neutral ground, equidistant from the village and the indigenous community. The proposal generated intense debate. Many were suspicious of the company's intentions. "It's just to clean their guilty conscience," argued Maria do Carmo, the teacher. "Or to control us," warned Raoni, always vigilant about indigenous rights. After many meetings, they reached a consensus. They would accept the funding, but with clear conditions. The center would be managed by a joint council, formed by an equal number of representatives from the village and the indigenous community. The company would have no decision-making power over research, and part of the resources would be allocated to a fund for treating children who still suffered sequelae from the contamination. Construction began on the spring equinox, a date chosen for its symbolism of renewal. It followed bioconstruction principles with local materials and sustainable techniques. The circular design referred to both traditional indigenous dwellings and rural Minas Gerais chapels. When it was finished, the following year, it immediately became a symbol of the new beginning. The inauguration took place on a clear September day. Authorities from all levels, national press, representatives of indigenous communities from various regions of the country. Little Tiao, now recovered from the intoxication, cut the ribbon together with Mayara, Jurasi's granddaughter. They symbolized the future they were building, a future of mutual respect, of shared wisdom. During the ceremony, Conceição announced the creation of a scholarship program for young indigenous and non-indigenous people who wanted to study environmental recovery, techniques combining modern science and ancestral knowledge. What we did here cannot be just an isolated success story. It needs to be a seed that spreads. In the months that followed, the center became a national reference point. Delegations from other communities affected by environmental disasters came to learn. Researchers collaborated with shamans. Medicinal plants were studied both in laboratories and in traditional rituals. And at the center of this movement, Conceição and Juraci saw their work flourish far beyond what they had imagined. One quiet afternoon, while organizing plant samples in the center's laboratory, Juraci made an unexpected invitation. "I want to show you a place, the most sacred place for my people." They walked for almost 3 hours deep into the forest, climbing steep slopes, crossing streams of crystal-clear waters. Finally, they reached an elevated plateau. Before them, a waterfall dropped almost 30 meters, forming a pool of waters so clear they seemed unreal. "The sacred spring," explained Juraci, "the origin of the river. Few non-indigenous people have been here." Conceição observed in silence, respecting the solemnity of the moment. "When the contamination began, I feared it would reach here, that our source of life would be poisoned forever." "It's so perfect," she whispered. "This is where I come when I need to decide something important." Juraci hesitated, then continued. "In the tradition of my people, when a man finds his life companion, he brings her to the spring, for the spirits of the waters to bless the union." Conceição felt her heart quicken. "Juraci, are you asking you to be my companion?" "Yes." He took her hands in his. "Not in the white way or the Krenak way, in our way, the way we created together." Silent tears ran down Conceição's face. "How would it be? You would continue your work, I would continue mine. But we would do it. Together. We would build a house between the village and the center, a place that doesn't belong entirely to any world, but that creates a new one. A world where the waters become clear again," she completed, smiling through tears. "Yes." The union ceremony took place 3 moons later. It wasn't a Catholic wedding or a traditional Krenak ritual. It was something new, created especially for them. It was held at the confluence of the village stream with the main river, symbolizing the meeting of different paths that become one. Father Joachim and Chief Ubirata conducted the celebration together, each in his language, each with his sacred symbols. Conceição wore a simple white dress, adorned with seeds and native flowers. Juraci was dressed in traditional Krenak attire for solemn occasions. The guests formed a circle around them, half from the village, half from the indigenous community. Children carried small lanterns that reflected in the water, creating a magical scenery. At the end of the ceremony, everyone was invited to plant a native tree seedling on the banks of the river, a symbol of the collective commitment to the regeneration of the land. 5 years passed since the union of Conceição and Juraci. The Center for Environmental Recovery and Traditional Knowledge became internationally recognized. The method developed by them for depolluting rivers contaminated by mining was replicated in several countries. The Krenak village flourished, with young people returning, attracted by the new possibilities of reconciling tradition and contemporaneity. The village of Aguas Claras became a model of sustainable development and intercultural respect. And the river came to deserve the name that gave origin to the village. Its waters, now clear again, sustained life in abundance. In the wood and mud house they built together, on the symbolic border between 2 worlds that learned to respect each other, Conceição and Juraci contemplated their most precious legacy. Kawa, their 3-year-old son, a boy with bright and curious eyes who spoke Portuguese and Krenak with the same fluency, who knew both the scientific names of plants and their ancestral stories. "For what world are we raising our son?" asked Conceição, watching the little one play with colorful seeds in the backyard. "For a world of clear waters," replied Juraci, smiling at his companion. "A world where different knowledge doesn't compete, but complements each other. Where the river doesn't separate, it unites. On the banks of that same river that almost died, children of all colors now ran. Fishermen cast their nets with confidence. Women washed clothes without fear. Life had returned in its splendid diversity. And it all began with an unjust accusation and a woman who dared to defend the truth even when she was alone. Little Kawa ran to his parents, bringing in his hands a discovery. "Look, Mom, look, Dad, a different seed." It was a small, winged seed, one of those that fly with the wind. Conceição examined it, intrigued. "I've never seen this species around here." Jurasi smiled, recognizing it. "It's a traveling seed. It comes from far away, brought by the wind. The ancients say that where it germinates, new hope is born." Kawa planted it carefully in the garden they maintained together, a small action that, like all great changes, began with a simple act of faith in the future. That night, as they always did on the first day of the new moon, the three walked to the river's edge. They lit a small ceramic lantern and set it to float on the waters. It was their way of giving thanks for the rebirth, for the unlikely union, for the future they were building together. As they watched the light move away, dancing gently on the clear waters, they knew that their story, the story of the unjustly condemned Indian and the widow who defended him, would be told for generations. Not as an ancient legend, but as the moment when two different cultures found in adversity the strength to create something new and beautiful, something as crystalline and essential as the waters that once again flowed clean, reflecting a sky where everyone, finally, could recognize themselves. If you were moved by this journey of transformation, cultural union, and nature's rebirth, leave your like, subscribe to the channel, and share in the comments your reflection on how we can, just like